events in this country to sow divisiveness and discord, and in particular through the use of state-associated media from some of those countries, but also social media provides a bullhorn or an amplifier to gin up more controversy where controversy may already exist, and to try to generate upheaval in that regard. And those foreign actors should know that we're watching it extremely closely and are prepared to act if necessary.
And what's your question for Mr. Carvajal?
Director, can you address some concerns that have been raised in the last few days about the BOP, specifically that some officers stationed around D.C. Have said that they've been specifically told not to tell people that they work for the federal government? And last night we learned an inmate at the MDC in Brooklyn had died after officers used pepper spray on him after he barricaded himself. Do you have concerns there that non-lethal force resulted in someone's death?
Thank you, Mike, for the question, and let me clarify this. First of all, I'm not aware of any specific Bureau of Prisons personnel being told not to identify themselves. What I attribute that to is probably the fact that we normally operate within the confines of our institution and we don't need to identify ourselves. Most of our identification is institution specific and probably wouldn't mean a whole lot to people in D.C. I probably should have done a better job of marking them nationally as the agency. Point is well taken, but I assure you that no one was specifically told, to my knowledge, not to identify themselves. As for your question regarding the incident at MDC Brooklyn, what I can tell you, we did do a press release with the information in there. It was, as you stated, an incident involving a disruptive individual down in a cell. The officers did utilize pepper spray, as you say, OC, and afterwards the individual unfortunately died. What I will tell you is that we immediately referred the case to the FBI and the Office of Inspector General. I was actually notified this morning that the Officer Inspector General is going to take that case. And that's about all I can comment on because the matter is under investigation.
Let me just add that the Bureau of Prisons SORT teams are used frequently for emergency response and in emergency situations and either civil disturbances or hurricanes or other things like that. They're highly trained units, and in fact, in the Department of Justice, we do not really have large numbers of units that are trained to deal with civil disturbances. I know a lot of people maybe looking back on history think we can call on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of U.S. Marshals, and that's simply not the case. Our Marshals response force is approximately 100 U.S. Marshals. And so historically, when there have been emergencies where we have to respond with people who do have experience in these kinds of emergencies, they're highly trained people. We use what are called SORT teams, response teams from the Bureau of Prisons. And I could see a number of, now in the federal system, we don't wear badges with our name. I mean, the agents don't wear badges in their names and stuff like that, which many civilian police agents, non-federal police agencies do. I could understand why some of these individuals simply wouldn't want to talk to people about who they are, if that in fact was the case. I'll take the next question.
Our next question comes from Sadie Gurman with Wall Street Journal. Please go ahead. Sadie, your line is open now.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi there. Hoping you can explain how exactly you coordinate the National Guard deployment and movement in and around Washington with those of various federal law enforcement agencies. Is it you who communicates the orders to them, and how does that work?
No, well, it largely depends who they're supporting at that time. Some of the National Guard were supporting the Metropolitan Police Department, and some of them would be out beyond the White House perimeter, working the streets with MPD. So they would be tactically attached there. Others, we asked the National Guard to protect federal monuments, and so a number of the units, maybe even, well, I won't speculate about a majority, but a lot of the units were dispersed around the city to protect federal monuments or particular federal facilities. Those that were within the White House area and were part of protecting the White House and Lafayette Park area were under the direction of the tactical commanders in that area. But in terms of requesting the resources and asking for their assistance, that was ultimately my responsibility of ensuring that the National Guard that we needed to support law enforcement and support the district were brought to bear. Next question.
Yes, sir. Our next question comes from Katie Benner with New York Times. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Attorney General. Thank you so much for doing this press conference. I have two questions, but the most important is probably I'd like to ask you about your thoughts on police abuse of power. Last year at a law enforcement conference, you said that such abuse reflected bad apples more than systemic breakdowns. But today you said George Floyd's death is not the first of its kind. While the vast majority of officers do their jobs bravely and righteously, it's undeniable that many African Americans lack confidence in the criminal justice system. So has your thinking on whether we're looking at a systemic issue or not shifted over time?
No, my views haven't shifted recently. And what you quoted, I think, is consistent. And you were addressing, the use of excessive force. Is that right, Katie? Is that what you were addressing, or were you talking more?
Yes, excessive force, the police abuse, yes.
Yeah, I do think that those who engage in excessive force that involves, remember, federal civil rights laws address willful use of excessive force, and those that engage in that kind of activity, I think, are a distinct minority. And I think the overwhelming number of police officers try conscientiously to use appropriate and reasonable force.
And then my second question was just, it seems that we're ratcheting up in the district the tools and the power of the federal response, giving DEA, BOP, for example, the power to make arrests. I'm wondering why that's happening now, because it seems that the streets have been relatively calm and there's no curfew tonight. And I think that decision was made by the mayor because she has confidence that we've sort of returned to order.
Well, actually, after assessing the situation last night toward the end of the evening, that is late in, or maybe early in the morning, I felt that we could afford to collapse our perimeter and eliminate some of the checkpoints and so forth, and take a little bit of a more low-profile footprint for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think that we have seen a sharp reduction in violent episodes and peaceful demonstrations, and our hope and expectation is that those will continue. And also because we now have on hand sufficient resources, we feel, to deal with that contingency if violence increases. So I do think that over the weekend, and certainly at the beginning of this week, we had a phenomenon around the country with a number of cities getting extremely violent. A lot of officers have been hurt around the country, a lot of victims, a lot of property damage. And as I said, on Sunday, it was probably the peak of violence in D.C., and on Monday, we were still facing very large demonstrations that were belligerent and throwing projectiles, although the evening ultimately ended more peaceably. So as I told the governors on Monday, it's very important to use sufficient forces, law enforcement, to establish law and order in a city when you have riots running. If you use insufficient resources, it's dangerous for everybody. It's dangerous for the officers, it's dangerous for the protesters, it's dangerous for the population because things can easily get out of control and you lose control of events. That's what riots are. And the way to address it is to make sure the resources are there and that people understand the resources are there to deal with that kind of violence. And I think once that occurred, it provided an environment where things could quiet down, and they did quiet down, and hopefully they will stay quieted down. Next. Okay. I think that was it. I appreciate everyone's attendance. And I again want to appreciate the hard work done by all the men and women in the Department of Justice and the Justice Department components and their leaders. Thank you.
Thank you all for attending.